In the marble halls of Florence, where shadows danced with secrets and power whispered through corridors lined with Renaissance art, a man sat hunched over parchment, his quill scratching against the silence of exile. Niccolò Machiavelli, once the trusted secretary of the Florentine Republic, now found himself cast out from the very circles of influence he had navigated with such skill. Yet in this forced solitude, surrounded by the ghosts of political failures and the weight of hard-earned wisdom, he would craft the most enduring treatise on power the world had ever known. The year was 1513, and Italy lay fractured like a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a different lord, a different ambition, a different dream of dominion. City-states warred with one another while foreign armies trampled across the peninsula, leaving devastation in their wake. It was in this chaos that Machiavelli recognized the eternal dance of power, a performance that required three distinct but interconnected acts: the regal authority to command absolute loyalty, the strategic mind to orchestrate complex campaigns, and the ethereal ability to disappear when circumstances demanded invisibility. These were not merely political techniques but rather the fundamental aspects of human nature when confronted with the intoxicating prospect of control over others. Power, Machiavelli understood, was neither inherently good nor evil. It was a force of nature, as inevitable as the tides and as necessary as breathing for those who would shape the destiny of nations. Part 1. Rule like a king. The architecture of authority. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Palazzo Vecchio as Lorenzo de' Medici strode through the halls that had witnessed centuries of Florentine power. Each step echoed with purpose, each gesture calculated to reinforce the invisible crown that sat upon his head. Here was a man who understood the first principle of Machiavelli's Trinity: the true power begins not with force, but with the absolute conviction that one deserves to wield it. To rule like a king meant to embody authority so completely that it became indistinguishable from one's very being. This was not merely about wearing fine clothes or sitting on elevated thrones, though these symbols certainly played their part in the grand theater of power. Rather, it was about cultivating an internal sovereignty so profound that others would feel compelled to submit without even understanding why. The greatest rulers throughout history had possessed this quality in abundance. They carried themselves as if the very ground they walked upon had been ordained for their feet alone. When they spoke, their words carried the weight of divine mandate, not because they necessarily believed in their own divinity, but because they had trained themselves to speak with the unshakable confidence that their vision was the only one that mattered. Consider how Caesar crossed the Rubicon not with the desperate gamble of a cornered general, but with the measured certainty of a man who knew that destiny itself flowed in his veins. His famous words, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast, were not spoken in fear but in the calm recognition that some moments in history demand not hesitation but absolute commitment to one's own authority. This regal bearing required constant cultivation. Every interaction became an opportunity to reinforce the natural order with oneself at its apex. The way one entered a room, the manner in which one's gaze swept across assembled courtiers, the precise timing of a strategic silence, all these elements combined to create an atmosphere where submission felt not like defeat but like participation in something magnificent and inevitable. Yet the art of ruling like a king extended far beyond personal bearing. It required the construction of elaborate systems of loyalty and dependence. The most successful rulers understood that power was not a finite resource to be hoarded but rather a currency that gained value through circulation. They created networks of obligation and reward, weaving webs of interdependence so complex that those caught within them could not imagine life outside the structure. The court became a carefully orchestrated machine for manufacturing consent. Every position, every privilege, every small honor was dispensed with surgical precision to create competing interests that could only be resolved through appeal to royal judgment. Courtiers found themselves simultaneously competitors and collaborators, each dependent upon the sovereign's favor for their position in the hierarchy they had helped to create. This system served multiple purposes. First, it prevented the formation of unified opposition by ensuring that potential rivals were too busy competing with each other to organize against the center of power. Second, it created multiple channels of information flowing back to the ruler, as each courtier became both informant and potential subject of surveillance. Third, it established the ruler as the sole source of advancement and security, making loyalty not just advisable but economically rational. The physical spaces of power reinforced these psychological dynamics. Palaces were designed to overwhelm and disorient visitors, with soaring ceilings that dwarfed human scale and labyrinthine corridors that left outsiders dependent upon guides who served the royal will. Throne rooms positioned rulers at elevated heights while suppliants were forced to approach across vast expanses of polished marble, their footsteps echoing in chambers designed to amplify their vulnerability. But, perhaps the most crucial aspect of ruling like a king was the ability to make decisive judgments appear effortless. The greatest rulers cultivated an air of natural wisdom, as if the correct course of action revealed itself to them through some mystical connection to divine will. In reality, this apparent effortlessness was the product of intense preparation and calculation. Behind every spontaneous seeming decree lay hours of consultation with advisors, analysis of competing interests, and careful consideration of potential consequences. The ruler's day began before dawn with private briefings from trusted counselors. Maps were studied, reports analyzed, potential threats assessed. By the time the court assembled for the day's public business, the sovereign had already gamed out multiple scenarios for each decision that might arise. When a problem was presented publicly, the ruler could respond with what appeared to be instantaneous wisdom but was actually the culmination of extensive behind-the-scenes preparation. This preparation extended to the cultivation of multiple sources of information and advice. The wisest rulers never relied on a single counselor or faction but instead maintained relationships with competing groups of advisors, each offering different perspectives and each serving as a check on the others. They learned to recognize the difference between information and opinion, between analysis and advocacy. They developed the ability to extract useful insights even from sources whose motivations they questioned. The mastery of ceremony and ritual formed another pillar of regal authority. Every public appearance became a carefully choreographed performance designed to reinforce the ruler's special status. The timing of entrances and exits, the selection of which petitioners would be heard, the symbolic objects that accompanied royal pronouncements, all these elements worked together to create an atmosphere of sacred authority. Religious ceremonies provided particularly powerful opportunities for rulers to associate themselves with divine sanction. Whether crowning themselves in magnificent cathedrals or participating in harvest festivals that celebrated their role as guarantor of prosperity, successful rulers understood how to harness the emotional power of collective ritual to strengthen their political position. Yet the performance of kingship required knowing when to reveal vulnerability strategically. The most effective rulers occasionally allowed carefully chosen glimpses of their humanity, moments of apparent spontaneity or emotion that made their authority seem more accessible and, therefore, more legitimate. A tear shed at a funeral, anger displayed at news of injustice to common people, joy expressed at a subject's good fortune, these calculated displays of feeling helped to humanize what might otherwise appear as cold, distant power. The management of court intrigue demanded constant vigilance and sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Every relationship carried potential for both advancement and betrayal. The ruler had to maintain enough distance to preserve mystique while remaining close enough to key players to monitor their loyalty and intentions. This balancing act required exceptional skill in reading character and predicting behavior under pressure. Information became the lifeblood of regal power. The most successful rulers developed extensive networks of spies and informants, not to terrorize their subjects but to maintain awareness of threats and opportunities as they emerged. Knowledge of who owed money to whom, which nobles were feuding over land rights, which merchants were struggling with their businesses, which clergy were questioning official doctrine, all this intelligence allowed rulers to intervene at precisely the right moments to strengthen their own position. The dispensation of justice provided another crucial arena for demonstrating regal authority. Public trials and executions served not only to punish wrongdoers but to reinforce the ruler's role as ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. The most effective rulers understood that justice had to appear both impartial and decisive. They developed reputations for fairness that made their judgments seem legitimate even to those who disagreed with specific decisions. Economic control formed the foundation upon which all other aspects of regal power rested. Rulers who controlled trade routes, tax collection, and the distribution of wealth held the keys to everyone else's prosperity. They used this economic leverage to reward loyalty and punish dissent, creating powerful incentives for cooperation with their agenda. The most sophisticated rulers understood that economic growth benefited everyone but that controlling the distribution of that growth's benefits allowed them to maintain their central role in society's functioning. The cultivation of legacy provided long-term security for regal authority. Great rulers fought beyond their own lifetimes to ensure that their systems of power would survive their deaths. They invested in monuments and institutions that would preserve their memory and influence. They carefully managed succession plans to minimize disruption and maintain continuity. They understood that true kingship meant creating structures that would endure long after their personal rule had ended. The psychological dimension of regal authority required constant attention to one's own mental state. The isolation that came with ultimate power could lead to paranoia, depression, or megalomania if not carefully managed. The wisest rulers developed strategies for maintaining perspective and emotional balance. They found ways to access honest feedback despite their elevated position. They cultivated relationships with individuals who could speak truth to power without fear of retaliation. Physical health and personal discipline formed crucial components of regal authority. A ruler who appeared weak or self-indulgent undermined the entire edifice of power built around personal dominance. The most successful rulers maintained rigorous exercise routines, careful diets, and disciplined sleep schedules. They understood that their bodies were as much instruments of statecraft as their minds, and they treated both with appropriate seriousness. The management of time and attention required exceptional organizational skill. Every hour of a ruler's day carried potential consequences for thousands or millions of people. Deciding which meetings to take, which letters to read personally, which ceremonies to attend, which problems to address immediately versus which to delegate, these seemingly mundane choices shaped the entire direction of governmental policy. Yet perhaps the most important aspect of ruling like a king was the ability to make others feel that serving royal interests aligned with their own deepest values and aspirations. The greatest rulers possessed an almost supernatural ability to inspire others to see royal goals as their own personal missions. They created shared narratives that made loyalty feel not like submission but like participation in something noble and historically significant. This inspirational quality could not be faked or forced. It required genuine conviction on the ruler's part that their vision truly served the greater good. Whether this conviction was justified mattered less than its authenticity. People could sense when a leader truly believed in their cause versus when they were merely manipulating others for personal gain. The most enduring forms of regal authority rested on the ruler's ability to convince both themselves and their subjects that their power served purposes larger than personal aggrandizement. The cultivation of mystery and unpredictability provided additional tools for maintaining regal authority. Subjects who could perfectly predict their ruler's responses would eventually lose the sense of awe that made submission feel natural. The most effective rulers maintained elements of inscrutability that kept others slightly off balance and dependent upon royal favor for clarity about expectations and intentions. This strategic unpredictability had to be balanced against the need for consistency in core principles. Subjects needed to understand what fundamental values and goals remained constant even as tactics and specific policies evolved. The art lay in being unpredictable about methods while remaining completely reliable about ultimate objectives. The development of personal charisma required intensive self-cultivation. The most compelling rulers worked constantly to improve their oratory skills, their ability to read and respond to audiences, their command of body language and vocal tone. They studied the great speakers of history and practiced techniques for holding attention and inspiring emotion through their presence alone. Yet charisma without substance inevitably led to disappointment and eventual rejection. The most enduring forms of regal authority combined inspirational presentation with demonstrated competence in addressing practical problems. Subjects needed to see that their ruler's magnificent bearing translated into effective governance that improved their lives in tangible ways. The management of expectations formed a crucial but often overlooked aspect of regal authority. Rulers who promised too much or allowed unrealistic hopes to develop faced inevitable disappointment that undermined their credibility. The wisest rulers learned to underpromise and overdeliver, creating positive surprises that reinforced their reputation for effectiveness. The relationship between ruler and ruled required constant calibration. Too much distance created alienation and resentment. Too much familiarity destroyed the mystique that made authority feel natural. The most successful rulers developed sophisticated understanding of how different groups within their domains preferred to be approached and governed, adapting their style to match these preferences while maintaining their essential core identity. The integration of entertainment and governance provided powerful tools for maintaining popular support. The most effective rulers understood that people needed not just security and prosperity but also spectacle and celebration. Public festivals, tournaments, theatrical performances, and architectural projects served both to demonstrate royal magnificence and to provide subjects with enjoyable experiences they associated with royal benevolence. Part 2, Think Like a General, the strategic mind in action. The art of war reveals the soul of leadership more clearly than any other human endeavor. When Alexander stood before the walls of Tyre, when Hannibal contemplated the Alps, when Napoleon gazed across the frozen expanse toward Moscow, they faced moments that would define not just military campaigns but the very essence of strategic thinking. To think like a general means to see beyond the immediate battle to the war itself, beyond the war to the peace that must follow, and beyond that peace to the next conflict that will inevitably arise. Strategic thinking begins with the fundamental recognition that all human endeavors involve competition for limited resources. Whether the prize is territory, wealth, influence, or simple survival, the principles that govern success remain constant across centuries and cultures. The general's mind operates simultaneously on multiple levels of analysis, constantly shifting between tactical details and grand strategic vision, always seeking to identify the critical points where pressure applied with precision can achieve maximum effect. The greatest military leaders throughout history shared a common ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. They understood that behind every apparent random event lay chains of causation that could be analyzed, predicted, and ultimately controlled. When Caesar invaded Gaul, he was not simply seeking military glory but rather implementing a comprehensive strategy to position himself as indispensable to Roman prosperity and security. Every battle served multiple purposes: eliminating threats, acquiring wealth, training his legions, and building the political capital he would need for his eventual march on Rome itself. This multi-layered approach to strategic thinking requires exceptional intellectual discipline. The general's mind must remain constantly focused on objectives while remaining flexible about methods. When circumstances change, and they always do, the strategic thinker adapts tactics while maintaining unwavering commitment to ultimate goals. This combination of steadfast purpose with tactical fluidity separates genuine strategic genius from mere tactical competence. The mastery of information forms the foundation of all strategic thinking. Sun Tzu's famous observation that knowing yourself and knowing your enemy ensures victory in every battle reflects a deeper truth about the centrality of intelligence to successful strategy. The general's mind operates like a vast processing system, constantly gathering, analyzing, and synthesizing information from multiple sources to build comprehensive understanding of the operational environment. This intelligence gathering extends far beyond simple military reconnaissance. The strategic thinker seeks to understand enemy psychology, economic constraints, political pressures, cultural values, and historical precedents that might influence decision-making. When Wellington prepared for Waterloo, his victory depended as much on his understanding of Napoleon's personality and tactical preferences as on his knowledge of French troop dispositions and capabilities. The ability to think several moves ahead distinguishes strategic genius from tactical competence. Like a master chess player, the general's mind constantly evaluates multiple possible sequences of action and reaction, seeking to identify lines of development that lead to favorable outcomes regardless of enemy responses. This requires not just intelligence but also exceptional powers of visualization and the ability to maintain mental clarity while processing enormous amounts of complex information. Strategic timing represents another crucial dimension of the general's art. The same action that proves decisive when executed at precisely the right moment may prove disastrous when attempted too early or too late. Frederick the Great's victories often depended less on superior numbers or equipment than on his uncanny ability to identify the perfect moment to strike, when enemy forces were most vulnerable and his own troops most prepared. This mastery of timing requires deep understanding of psychological and emotional factors that influence human performance. Armies, like individuals, experience cycles of confidence and doubt, energy and exhaustion, cohesion and fragmentation. The strategic thinker learns to recognize these patterns and to time major actions to coincide with moments of maximum advantage and minimum risk. The cultivation of multiple options provides insurance against the inevitable unpredictability of conflict. The most successful generals never commit themselves to single courses of action but instead develop elaborate contingency plans that allow rapid adaptation as circumstances evolve. When Eisenhower planned the D-Day invasion, he prepared for dozens of different scenarios involving weather, enemy response, equipment failure, and communication breakdown. This thorough preparation allowed Allied forces to maintain momentum despite numerous unforeseen complications that would have derailed less flexible operations. The development of these contingency plans requires systematic analysis of potential failure points and alternative approaches for achieving strategic objectives. The general's mind constantly asks what-if questions and develops specific responses for each possibility. This mental discipline ensures that temporary setbacks do not become strategic disasters and that opportunities can be exploited quickly when they arise. The management of resources represents a fundamental challenge that separates successful generals from those who achieve tactical victories but lose strategic campaigns. Every decision about where to commit troops, how to allocate supplies, when to engage versus when to withdraw involves trade-offs that can determine the ultimate outcome of entire wars. The strategic thinker develops sophisticated understanding of logistical constraints and works within these limitations to achieve maximum effect. This resource management extends beyond material considerations to include human factors such as morale, cohesion, and leadership development. The most successful generals understand that armies are complex social organisms that require careful cultivation to maintain peak performance over extended periods. They invest time and effort in building institutional cultures that can survive individual casualties and continue functioning effectively even under extreme stress. The ability to see through enemy deception and to practice effective deception oneself forms another crucial aspect of strategic thinking. All warfare involves elaborate games of bluff and counter-bluff, with each side attempting to conceal its true intentions while discovering those of its opponents. The general's mind must remain constantly alert to signs of deception while simultaneously crafting misleading impressions about its own capabilities and plans. This psychological warfare requires deep understanding of how different types of personalities process information and make decisions under pressure. The strategic thinker learns to present information in ways that lead enemies to draw incorrect conclusions while avoiding deceptions so obvious that they reveal the underlying truth. The most elegant deceptions contain elements of truth that make them believable while concealing the most crucial facts. The coordination of diverse forces presents complex challenges that test every aspect of strategic thinking. Modern military operations involve multiple branches of service, allied forces from different nations, civilian contractors, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic personnel. The general's mind must somehow integrate all these disparate elements into coherent action directed toward common objectives. This integration requires exceptional communication skills and the ability to translate strategic vision into specific instructions that different types of organizations can understand and implement. The strategic thinker must speak multiple languages, military, political, economic, cultural, and must understand how different groups process information and make decisions. The cultivation of surprise represents one of the most powerful weapons in the strategic arsenal. When Hannibal crossed the Alps or when MacArthur landed at Inchon, they achieved decisive advantages not through superior numbers but through doing what enemies considered impossible or unthinkable. The general's mind constantly seeks opportunities to achieve surprise through unconventional approaches that exploit enemy assumptions and blind spots. This cultivation of surprise requires willingness to accept significant risks and to pursue courses of action that might appear foolish to more conventional thinkers. The strategic genius possesses sufficient confidence in their analysis to commit resources to plans that others would reject as too dangerous or improbable to succeed. The mastery of alliance building and coalition management extends strategic thinking beyond purely military considerations into the realm of international politics. The most successful military campaigns in history have typically involved complex partnerships among multiple groups with varying and sometimes conflicting interests. The general's mind must understand these political dynamics and work to maintain coalition cohesion while pursuing military objectives. This political dimension of strategy requires diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity that complement purely military expertise. The strategic thinker must understand how to frame military objectives in terms that appeal to different ally interests and how to manage disputes that inevitably arise among coalition partners operating under stress. The development of institutional learning systems ensures that strategic wisdom accumulates and improves over time rather than disappearing with individual leaders. The most effective military organizations create formal processes for capturing lessons learned, analyzing both successes and failures, and incorporating new insights into doctrine and training programs. This institutional approach to strategic thinking requires systematic methods for evaluating performance, identifying best practices, and sharing knowledge across different units and campaigns. The general's mind must think not just about immediate tactical problems but about how to build organizational capabilities that will serve future strategic challenges. The integration of technological innovation with traditional strategic principles requires constant adaptation as new capabilities emerge and old assumptions become obsolete. The general's mind must remain alert to technological developments that might create new opportunities or vulnerabilities while maintaining focus on timeless human factors that continue to influence conflict outcomes. This technological awareness must be balanced against recognition that fundamental strategic principles remain constant despite changing tools and techniques. The strategic thinker learns to distinguish between innovations that represent genuine game-changing capabilities and those that merely provide marginal improvements to existing approaches. The management of public opinion and political support forms an increasingly important dimension of strategic thinking in democratic societies where military operations must maintain popular legitimacy to continue. The general's mind must consider how different courses of action will be perceived by various domestic constituencies and how these perceptions might influence political decisions about resource allocation and operational constraints. This political awareness requires understanding of media dynamics, public psychology, and the complex relationships between military effectiveness and political sustainability. The strategic thinker must balance optimal military approaches with politically feasible alternatives that can maintain necessary support over time. The cultivation of strategic patience represents perhaps the most difficult aspect of the general's art. In a culture that values immediate results and rapid resolution of problems, the ability to pursue long-term objectives through sustained effort over extended periods requires exceptional discipline and conviction. The greatest strategic victories often require years or even decades of careful preparation and gradual positioning. This strategic patience must be combined with tactical urgency when opportunities arise. The general's mind must distinguish between situations that require immediate action and those that benefit from careful development over time. This discrimination requires deep understanding of strategic dynamics and exceptional judgment about when patience serves strategic objectives versus when delay allows opportunities to slip away. The development of strategic intuition complements analytical thinking with pattern recognition capabilities that operate below the level of conscious reasoning. The most successful generals often describe moments when they knew the right course of action without being able to articulate exactly why. This intuitive capability develops through extensive experience with strategic problems and deep study of historical examples. This strategic intuition should enhance rather than replace systematic analysis. The general's mind learns to use intuitive insights as starting points for more detailed examination rather than as substitutes for careful reasoning. The combination of analytical rigor with intuitive pattern recognition provides the most robust foundation for strategic decision-making under conditions of uncertainty and time pressure. Part 3, Vanish like a Ghost. The art of strategic invisibility in the deepest shadows of statecraft lies perhaps the most crucial yet least understood aspect of power, the ability to disappear completely when circumstances demand invisibility. This is not the crude art of hiding from enemies, nor the simple craft of espionage, but rather the sophisticated mastery of becoming simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, influencing events while remaining untraceable, shaping outcomes while avoiding responsibility for their consequences. The ghost operates in the spaces between the visible and the invisible, between action and inaction, between presence and absence. Like morning mist that shapes the landscape while remaining intangible, the master of strategic invisibility learns to exercise power through indirection, suggestion, and the careful manipulation of other people's actions rather than through direct intervention that leaves fingerprints and creates accountability. This art begins with the fundamental recognition that the most effective power often operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. When Metternich orchestrated the Congress of Vienna, his greatest achievements came not through dramatic speeches or obvious maneuvering but through countless private conversations, carefully placed suggestions, and the subtle management of social dynamics that influenced how other participants thought about their options. By the time major decisions were made, the outcomes he preferred seemed natural and inevitable rather than imposed through Austrian manipulation. The cultivation of strategic invisibility requires complete mastery of one's own ego and the willingness to allow others to receive credit for victories that were actually orchestrated from the shadows. This psychological discipline proves extraordinarily difficult for most people, who crave recognition and validation for their contributions. The ghost must find satisfaction in results themselves rather than in public acknowledgement of their role in achieving those results. This ego mastery extends to the careful management of one's reputation and public persona. The most effective practitioners of strategic invisibility cultivate reputations that are simultaneously impressive and unremarkable. They become known as competent, reliable, and trustworthy without attracting the kind of attention that comes with being considered brilliant or dangerous. They develop the ability to be memorable when it serves their purposes and forgettable when visibility would create problems. The mastery of information networks forms the foundation of ghostly power. While kings rule through command and generals through force, ghosts influence through the careful management of what people know and when they know it. They become indispensable sources of intelligence while remaining mysterious about their own knowledge and capabilities. They learn to position themselves at the intersection of multiple information flows, gaining comprehensive understanding of complex situations while keeping others dependent upon them for crucial insights. This information mastery requires exceptional skills in human psychology and the ability to build relationships that provide access to sensitive knowledge without creating obvious obligations or compromising loyalties. The ghost learns to make people want to share secrets rather than having to extract information through pressure or manipulation. They become trusted confidants who somehow inspire others to reveal more than they intended. The development of multiple identities and personas allows the ghost to operate in different spheres without creating connections that might reveal the full scope of their activities. Like an actor playing different roles, the master of strategic invisibility learns to become genuinely different people in different contexts, complete with appropriate mannerisms, vocabularies, and apparent interests that match each particular environment. This multiplicity of identity must be managed with extraordinary care to avoid contradictions that might reveal the underlying deception. The ghost develops sophisticated memory systems and maintains detailed records to ensure consistency across different personas. They learn to compartmentalize their knowledge and responses so that information learned in one identity doesn't accidentally surface in another context where it would seem suspicious. The art of strategic withdrawal requires knowing not just when to disappear but how to do so without creating suspicion or leaving traces that might lead others to investigate further. The most skilled practitioners learn to fade from situations gradually, reducing their involvement incrementally so that their absence is noticed only after it becomes complete. They master the technique of becoming less available, less informed, less interested in ways that make others fill the vacuum they create. This strategic withdrawal must be balanced against the need to maintain sufficient influence to achieve desired outcomes. The ghost learns to identify the minimum level of involvement necessary to shape events while remaining below the threshold that would attract unwanted attention. This requires exceptional judgment about which interventions are absolutely necessary versus which can be accomplished through other means. The cultivation of proxy relationships allows the ghost to exercise power through intermediaries who may not even realize they are serving someone else's agenda. These proxies become the visible face of initiatives that actually originate from invisible sources. The ghost learns to identify people whose interests align with their own objectives and, then, provides those people with information, opportunities, and resources that enable them to pursue goals that serve the ghost's purposes. The management of these proxy relationships requires sophisticated understanding of motivation and the ability to provide different types of rewards and incentives that keep intermediaries committed without revealing the true source of their support. The ghost must learn to be simultaneously indispensable and invisible to their proxies, helping them achieve success while remaining in the background. The mastery of timing becomes even more crucial for the ghost than for the king or general, because invisible influence must be precisely calibrated to natural rhythms and existing trends. The ghost cannot simply force outcomes through direct application of power but must instead identify moments when small interventions can produce large effects through amplification of existing forces and tendencies. This temporal mastery requires exceptional pattern recognition abilities and deep understanding of how different types of systems respond to various forms of influence. The ghost learns to read the subtle signs that indicate when organizations, relationships, or political situations are approaching critical transition points where carefully applied pressure can produce dramatic changes in direction. The development of strategic ambiguity allows the ghost to maintain multiple options while avoiding commitments that might limit future flexibility. Rather than taking clear positions on controversial issues, the master of invisibility learns to speak and act in ways that can be interpreted differently by different audiences, each of whom believes they understand the ghost's true position and find it compatible with their own interests. This strategic ambiguity must be sophisticated enough to avoid detection while remaining consistent enough to maintain credibility. The ghost develops exceptional skill in the use of language that appears specific while actually remaining quite general, allowing listeners to project their own meanings onto apparently clear statements. The cultivation of uncertainty as a strategic weapon enables the ghost to control situations by making others unsure about what they know and whom they can trust. By carefully managing the flow of information and occasionally introducing contradictory signals, the skilled practitioner can create environments where potential opponents become paralyzed by doubt while allies become more dependent upon ghostly guidance to navigate confusion. This strategic cultivation of uncertainty requires deep psychological insight and exceptional self-control. The ghost must be able to maintain clarity about their own objectives and methods while creating confusion for others. They must resist the temptation to resolve uncertainties that serve their strategic purposes even when maintaining ambiguity creates personal discomfort. The mastery of strategic betrayal represents perhaps the darkest aspect of ghostly arts. Unlike the crude betrayal that results from weakness or greed, strategic betrayal involves the calculated sacrifice of some relationships and commitments to preserve more important objectives. The ghost learns to identify which loyalties can be safely abandoned when circumstances change and which must be maintained regardless of cost. This form of betrayal requires exceptional moral flexibility and the ability to compartmentalize emotional responses that might interfere with strategic thinking. The ghost must learn to break faith with some people while maintaining absolute reliability with others, creating a reputation for trustworthiness among key allies while remaining willing to abandon less crucial relationships when necessary. The development of escape routes and contingency plans takes on special importance for those who operate in the shadows, because exposure carries particularly severe consequences. The ghost must constantly maintain multiple options for extracting themselves from dangerous situations, including alternative identities, hidden resources, and relationships that can provide protection or assistance when problems arise. These contingency plans must be elaborate enough to handle various types of crises while remaining simple enough to implement quickly under stress. The ghost learns to maintain what intelligence professionals call sterile resources, capabilities that cannot be traced back to their regular identity or activities that can provide security when other options fail. The mastery of strategic patience becomes even more important for the ghost than for more visible operators, because invisible influence often requires extended periods of careful preparation before decisive action becomes possible. The ghost must learn to work toward objectives that may not be achievable for years or even decades, maintaining focus and commitment despite the absence of visible progress or external validation. This extended time horizon requires exceptional psychological resilience and sophisticated methods for maintaining motivation despite delayed gratification. The ghost develops internal reward systems based on intermediate achievements and strategic positioning rather than final outcomes, finding satisfaction in the gradual accumulation of influence and capability even when ultimate objectives remain distant. The cultivation of strategic loneliness represents perhaps the most psychologically demanding aspect of ghostly existence. Operating in the shadows requires accepting isolation from normal human relationships and the constant awareness that one's true nature and activities cannot be shared with others. The ghost must find ways to maintain psychological health while living a fundamentally solitary existence. This strategic loneliness must be balanced against the human need for connection and validation. The most successful practitioners develop carefully controlled relationships that provide emotional sustenance without compromising operational security. They learn to find satisfaction in their work itself rather than in external recognition or approval. The integration of visibility and invisibility allows the most sophisticated ghosts to operate simultaneously in multiple modes, appearing in public when it serves their purposes while maintaining extensive hidden capabilities and relationships. They learn to use their visible activities to provide cover for invisible operations, creating plausible explanations for their knowledge and capabilities that don't reveal their true sources and methods. This integration requires exceptional organizational abilities and the capacity to manage complex double lives without allowing contradictions or oversights to reveal the underlying deception. The ghost develops systematic approaches to information management and identity coordination that enable them to operate effectively across multiple domains simultaneously. The mastery of strategic sacrifice enables the ghost to achieve long-term objectives by accepting short-term losses that advance overall goals. This might involve allowing enemies to achieve temporary victories that ultimately expose their weaknesses, or permitting the failure of less important initiatives to preserve resources for more crucial operations. This strategic sacrifice requires exceptional conviction about long-term objectives and the intellectual honesty to distinguish between necessary losses and avoidable failures. The ghost must learn to calculate trade-offs with cold precision while maintaining the emotional commitment necessary to sustain long-term effort. The development of strategic legacy allows even the ghost to achieve a form of immortality through influence that outlasts their personal involvement. The most sophisticated practitioners create systems and institutions that continue advancing their objectives long after they have disappeared from active participation. They learn to embed their values and methods into organizational cultures that perpetuate their influence without requiring their continued presence. This legacy building requires thinking beyond personal achievement to consider how one's work can contribute to larger historical developments. The ghost must learn to plant seeds that will grow into trees they may never see mature, finding satisfaction in contributing to changes that extend far beyond their own lifetime. The ultimate mastery of ghostly arts involves knowing when to emerge from the shadows and accept responsibility for one's achievements. The most skilled practitioners recognize that some objectives require temporary visibility and that strategic invisibility is a tool for achieving goals rather than an end in itself. They learn to move fluidly between visibility and invisibility as circumstances require. This transition between modes requires exceptional judgment about timing and circumstances. The ghost must be able to assess when invisibility has served its purpose and when continued hiding would actually impede further progress. They must learn to accept credit and responsibility when doing so advances their objectives, even if visibility creates new risks and constraints. The synthesis of all three modes, regal authority, strategic thinking, and ghostly invisibility, represents the ultimate achievement in the art of power. The master practitioner learns to embody all three aspects simultaneously, ruling like a king when authority is needed, thinking like a general when strategy is required, and vanishing like a ghost when invisibility serves their purposes. They develop the wisdom to know which mode is most appropriate for each situation and the skill to transition seamlessly between different approaches as circumstances evolve. This integration of apparently contradictory qualities requires exceptional psychological sophistication and years of careful development. The master must learn to hold multiple identities in creative tension, becoming simultaneously visible and invisible, commanding and subtle, direct and indirect as the situation demands. They achieve a form of power that transcends the limitations of any single approach by combining the strengths of all three modes while avoiding their individual weaknesses. In the end, Machiavelli's path to power reveals itself not as a simple formula for achieving dominance over others but as a comprehensive philosophy for navigating the complex realities of human interaction. The prince who would rule effectively must learn to see the world as it truly is rather than as idealists might wish it to be. They must accept responsibility for making difficult decisions that balance competing interests and conflicting values. They must develop the strength to bear the loneliness that comes with ultimate responsibility and the wisdom to use power in service of objectives larger than personal ambition. The path is neither easy nor guaranteed, for it requires the practitioner to develop capabilities that few possess and to make sacrifices that most would consider unacceptable. Yet for those with the vision to see beyond conventional morality to the deeper patterns that govern human affairs, and the courage to act upon that vision despite social disapproval, Machiavelli's Trinity offers a roadmap to influence that can reshape the world itself. The crown, the sword, and the shadow each has its place in the grand drama of power, and those who master all three become the authors of history rather than merely its subjects.